Hi, my sweet friends, and welcome back to Crochet Every Day with Judy. Today we are continuing reading from Dickens' stories about children, and we're reading today The Runaway Couple. Supposing a young gentleman not 8 years old was to run away with a fine young woman of 7, would you consider that a queer start? That there is a start as I, the boots at Holly Tree Inn, have seen with my own eyes, and I cleaned the shoes they ran away in, and they was so little that I couldn't get my hand into 'em. Master Harry Walmer's father, he lived at the Elms, away by Shooter's Hill, 6 or 7 miles from London. Excuse me. He was uncommon proud of Master Harry, as he was his only child, but he didn't spoil him neither. He was a gentleman that had a will of his own and an eye of his own, and that would be minded. Consequently, though he made quite a companion of the fine bright boy, still he kept the command over him. And the child was a child. I was under gardener there at that time, and one morning Master Harry, he comes to me and says, "Cobbs, how should you spell Nora if you was asked?" and then began cutting it in print all over the fence. I hadn't taken particular notice of children before that, but really it was pretty to see them two mites a-going about the place together deep in love, and the courage of that boy! Bless your soul, he'd have throwed off his little hat and tucked up his little sleeves and gone in at a lion, he would, if they had happened to meet one and she had been frightened of him. One day he stops along with her, where I was hoeing weeds in the gravel, and says, speaking up, "Cobbs," he says, "I like you." "Do you, sir? I'm proud to hear it." "Yes, I do, Cobbs. Why do I like you, do you think, Cobbs?" "Don't know, Master Harry, I am sure." "Because Nora likes you, Cobbs." "Indeed, sir. That's very gratifying." "Gratifying, Cobbs? It's better than millions of the brightest diamonds to be liked by Nora." "Certainly, sir." "You're going away, ain't you, Cobbs?" "Yes, sir." "Would you like another situation, Cobbs?" "Well, sir, I shouldn't object if it was a good un." "Then, Cobbs," says he, "you shall be our head gardener when we are married," and he tucks her in her little sky blue mantle under his arm and walks away. Excuse me. It was better than a picture and equal to a play to see them babies with their long, bright, curling hair, their sparkling eyes, and their beautiful light tread rambling about the garden deep in love. I was of opinion that the birds believed they was birds and kept up with them, singing to please them. Sometimes they would creep under the tulip tree and would sit there with their arms round one another's necks and their soft cheeks touching, a-reading about the prince and the dragon and the good and bad enchanters and the king's fair daughter. Sometimes I would hear them planning about having a house in a forest, keeping bees and a cow, and living entirely on milk and honey. Once I came upon them by the pond and heard Master Harry say, "Adorable Nora, kiss me and say you love me to distraction, or I'll jump in head foremost." And I make no question he would have done it if she hadn't complied. "Cobbs," says Master Harry one evening when I was watering the flowers, "I am going on a visit this present midsummer to my grandmamma's at York." "Are you indeed, sir? I hope you'll have a pleasant time. I am going into Yorkshire myself when I leave here." "Are you going to your grandmamma's, Cobbs?" "No, sir, I haven't got such a thing." "Not as a grandmamma, Cobbs?" "No, sir." The boy looked on at the watering of the flowers for a little while and then said, "I shall be very glad indeed to go, Cobbs." "Nora's going." "You'll be all right then, sir," says I, "with your beautiful sweetheart by your side." "Cobbs," returned the boy, flushing, "I never let anybody joke about it when I can prevent them." "It wasn't a joke, sir," says I with humility. "Wasn't so meant." "I am glad of that, Cobbs, because I like you, you know, and you're going to live with us, Cobbs." "Sir?" "What do you think my grandmamma gives me when I go down there?" "I couldn't so much as make a guess, sir." "A Bank of England £5 note, Cobbs." "Whew," says I, "that's a spanking sum of money, Master Harry." "A person could do a great deal with such a sum of money as that, couldn't a person, Cobbs?" "I believe you, sir." "Cobbs," said the boy, "I'll tell you a secret. At Nora's house they have been joking her about me, and pretending to laugh at our being engaged. Pretending to make a game of it, Cobbs." "Such, sir," says I, "is the depravity of human nature." The boy, looking exactly like his father, stood for a few minutes with his glowing face toward the sunset, and then departed with, "Good night, Cobbs, I'm going in." I was the boots at the Holly Tree Inn when one summer afternoon the coach drives up, and out of the coach gets these two children. The guard says to our governor, "I don't quite make out these little passengers, but the young gentleman's words was that they were to be brought here." The young gentleman gets out, hands his lady out, gives the guard something for himself, says to our governor, "We're to stop here tonight, please. Sitting room and 2 bedrooms will be required. Chops and cherry pudding for 2, and tucks her in her little sky-blue mantle under his arm and walks into the house much bolder than Brass. Judge what the amazement of that establishment was when those two tiny creatures, all alone by themselves, marched into the Angel. Much more so when I, who had seen them without their seeing me, give the governor my views of the expedition they was upon. Cobbs, says the governor, if this is so, I must set off myself to York and quiet their friends' minds. In which case you must keep your eye upon 'em and humor 'em till I come back. But before I take these measures, Cobbs, I should wish you to find out from themselves whether your opinion is correct. Sir, to you, says I, that shall be done directly. So I goes upstairs to the Angel, and there I finds Master Harry on an enormous sofa, a-drying the eyes of Miss Nora with his pocket-handkercher. Their little legs were entirely off the ground, of course, and it really is not possible to express how small them children looked. It's Cobbs, cried Master Harry, and comes running to me, catching hold of my hand. Miss Nora comes running on t'other side, and catching hold of my t'other hand, and they both jump for joy. I see you a-getting out, sir, says I. I thought it was you. I thought I couldn't be mistaken in your height and figure. What's the object of your journey, sir? Matrimonial? We are going to be married, Cobbs, at Gretna Green, returned the boy. We have run away on purpose. Nora has been in rather low spirits, Cobbs, but she'll be happy now we have found you to be our friend. Thank you, sir, and thank you, miss, says I, for your good opinion. Did you bring any luggage with you, sir? If you will believe me, when I give you my word and honor upon it, the lady had got a parasol, a smelling bottle, a round and a half of cold buttered toast, 8 peppermint drops, and a hairbrush seemingly a doll's. The gentleman had got about 6 yards of string, a knife, 3 or 4 sheets of writing paper folded up surprisingly small, an orange, and a Cheney mug with his name upon it. What may be the exact nature of your plans, sir? Says I. To go on, replied the boy. The courage of that boy was something wonderful. In the morning, and be married tomorrow. Just so, sir, says I. Would it meet your views, sir, if I was to accompany you? When I said this, they both jumped for joy again and cried out, Oh, yes, yes, Cobbs, yes. Well, sir, says I, if you will excuse my having the freedom to give an opinion, what I should recommend would be this. I'm acquainted with a pony, sir, which put in a phaeton that I could borrow, would take you and Mrs. Harry Walmers, Jr., myself driving, if you approve, to the end of your journey in a very short space of time. I am not altogether sure, sir, that this pony will be at liberty tomorrow, but even if you had to wait over tomorrow for him, it might be worth your while. As to the small account here, sir, in case you was to find yourself running it all short, that don't signify, because I'm a part proprietor of this inn, and it could stand over. I assure you that when they clapped their hands and jumped for joy again and called me good Cobbs and dear Cobbs and bent across me to kiss one another in the delight of their confiding hearts, I felt myself the meanest rascal for deceiving 'em that ever was born. Is there anything you want just at present, sir? Says I, mortally ashamed of myself. We would like some cakes after dinner, answered Master Harry, folding his arms, putting out one leg and looking straight at me, and 2 apples and jam. With dinner we should like to have toast and water, but Nora has always been accustomed to half a glass of currant wine at dessert, and so have I. It shall be ordered at the bar, sir, says I, and away I went. The way in which the women of that house, without exception every one of 'em, married and single, took to that boy when they heard the story, I consider surprising. It was as much as I could do to keep 'em from dashing into the room and kissing him. They climbed up all sorts of places at the risk of their lives to look at him through a pane of glass. They were 7 deep at the keyhole. They were out of their minds about him and his bold spirit. In the evening I went into the room to see how the runaway couple was getting on. The gentleman was on the window seat, supporting the lady in his arms. She had tears upon her face and was lying very tired and half asleep with her head upon his shoulder. Mrs. Harry Walmers, Jr. fatigued, sir, says I. Yes, she is tired, Cobbs, but she is not used to being away from home, and she has been in low spirits again. Cobbs, do you think you could bring a biffin, please? I ask your pardon, sir, says I. What was it you... I think a Norfolk biffin would rouse her, Cobbs. She's very fond of them. I withdrew in search of the required restorative, and when I brought it in, the gentleman handed it to the lady, and fed her with a spoon, and took a little himself. The lady being heavy with sleep and rather cross, what should you think, sir, says I, of a chamber candlestick? The gentleman approved. The chambermaid went first, up the great staircase. The lady, in her sky-blue mantle, followed, gallantly escorted by the gentleman. The gentleman embraced her at the door and retired to his own apartment, where I softly locked him up. I couldn't but feel what a base deceiver I was when they asked me at breakfast — they had ordered sweet milk and water and toast and currant jelly overnight — about the pony. It really was as much as I could do to look them 2 young things in the face and think how wicked I had grown up to be. Howsomever, I went on a-lying like a Trojan about the pony. I told him it did so unfortunately happen that the pony was half clipped, you see, and that he couldn't be taken out in that state for fear that it should strike to his inside, but that he'd be finished clipping in the course of the day, and that tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock the phaeton would be ready. My view of the whole case, looking back upon it, is that Mrs. Harry Walmers Jr. was beginning to give in. She hadn't had her hair curled when she went to bed, and she didn't seem quite up to brushing it herself, and its getting in her eyes put her out. But nothing put out Master Harry. He sat behind his breakfast cup, a-tearing away at the jelly as if he had been his own father. After breakfast they drawed soldiers, at least I know that many such was found in the fireplace, all on horseback. In the course of the morning Master Harry rang the bell. It was surprising how that there boy did carry on, and said in a sprightly way, "Cobbs, is there any good walks in this neighborhood?" "Yes, sir," says I. "There's Love Lane." "Get out with you, Cobbs." That was that there boy's expression. "You're joking." "Begging your pardon, sir," says I, "there really is Love Lane, and a pleasant walk it is, and proud I shall be to show it to yourself and Mrs. Harry Walmers Jr." "Nora, dear," said Master Harry, "this is curious. We really ought to see Love Lane. Put on your bonnet, my sweetest darling, and we will go there with Cobbs." I leave you to judge what a beast I felt myself to be when that young pair told me, as we all three jogged along together, that they had made up their minds to give me 2,000 guineas a year as head gardener, on account of my being so true a friend to him. I could have wished at the moment that the earth would have opened and swallowed me up. I felt so mean with their beaming eyes looking at me and believing me. Well, sir, I turned the conversation as well as I could and took him down Love Lane to the water meadows, and there Master Harry would have drowned himself in half a moment more a getting out a water lily for her, but nothing daunted that boy. Well, sir, they was tired out. All being so new and strange to him, they was tired as tired could be, and they lay down on a bank of daisies like the children in the wood, leastways meadows, and fell asleep. Well, sir, they woke up at last, and then one thing was getting pretty clear to me, namely, that Mrs. Harry Walmers Jr.'s temper was on the move. When Master Harry took her round the waist, she said he teased her so, and when he says, "Nora, my young May Moon, your Harry tease you?" she tells him, "Yes, and I want to go home." However, Master Harry, he kept up, and his noble heart was as fond as ever. Mrs. Walmers turned very sleepy about dusk and began to cry. Therefore, Mrs. Walmers went off to bed, as per yesterday, and Master Harry ditto repeated. About 11 or 12 at night comes back the governor in a chaise, along with Mr. Walmers and an elderly lady. Mr. Walmers looks amused and very serious both at once, and says to our missus, "We are very much indebted to you, ma'am, for your kind care of our little children, which we can never sufficiently acknowledge. Pray, ma'am, where is my boy?" Our missus says, "Cobbs has the dear children in charge, sir. Cobbs, show 40. Then he says to me, "Ah, Cobbs, I am glad to see you. I understood you was here." And I said, "Yes, sir, you're most obedient, sir." You may be surprised to hear me say it, perhaps, but I assure you that my heart beat like a hammer going upstairs. "I beg your pardon, sir," says I, while unlocking the door. "I hope you are not angry with Master Harry, for Master Harry is a fine boy, sir, and will do you credit and honor." And if the fine boy's father had contradicted me in the daring state of mind in which I then was, I think I should have fetched him a crack and taken the consequences. But Mr. Walmers only says, "No, Cobbs, no, my good fellow, thank you," and the door being open goes in. I go in too, holding the light, and I see Mr. Walmers go up to the bedside, bend gently down and kiss the little sleeping face. Then he stands looking at it for a minute, looking wonderfully like it, and then he gently shakes the little shoulder. "Harry, my dear boy, Harry." Master Harry starts up and looks at him, looks at me too. Such is the honor of that mite that he looks at me to see whether he has brought me into trouble. "I am not angry, my child. I only want you to dress yourself and come home." "Yes, Pa." Master Harry dresses himself quickly. His breast begins to swell when he is nearly finished, and it swells more and more as he stands a-looking at his father standing a-looking at him, the quiet image of him. "Please, may I," the spirit of that little creature and the way he kept his rising tears down, "please, dear Pa, may I kiss Nora before I go?" "You may, my child." So he takes Master Harry in his hand, and I lead the way with the candle, and they come to that other bedroom where the elderly lady is seated by the bed, and poor little Mrs. Harry Walmers Jr. is fast asleep. There the father lifts the child up to the pillow. He lays his little face down for an instant by the little warm face of poor unconscious little Mrs. Harry Walmers Jr., and gently draws it to him, a sight so touching to the chambermaids who are peeping through the door that one of them calls out, "It's a shame to part 'em." But this chambermaid was always a soft-hearted one. Not that there was any harm in that girl, far from it. And this is from Dickens' book, Christmas Stories. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.